All right, Patrick, I want to start with this very topic because when you look at this chart, you can really get a sense of the population growth that Canada's experienced. Now, obviously, Alberta has also experienced even more, population growth. Canada's experienced serious population growth. We're going to show how it compares to the U.S., which is kind of a lot less. But I do want to show this, Patrick, which is we're seeing a lot of people, and I'm gonna hit you with a hard hitting question straight out of the gate here, which is as we look at this crazy growth in the last couple of years. I mean, I think the numbers like just under 1.3 million people have been added to Canada just in the last couple of years. It's a lot of people, first and foremost, but second of all, and I think this is the part that's kind of interesting to me, is you could see it here in this chart. There's a lot of non-permanent residents that have been added more than ever before. You take a look at this. Typically, there's been a lot of net migration, excluding non-permanent residents. Now we really have a lot of non-permanent residents. And my question for you is this. The hard-hitting question to open the show is the following.
Drum roll, please.
Do you anticipate, as some people are now starting to leave this country, do you anticipate a population collapse because that could be detrimental to the real estate market?
Well, I think detrimental. The real estate market is being hammered right now. Let's kind of break down a few things. First and foremost, when we look at Canada as an economy, we have to just get to the truth and the reality of things. Canada is really about three provinces. Well, four, I guess. But you look at Quebec, you look at Ontario, you look at British Columbia, and then of course Alberta. These are the four provinces that really represent the majority of what's happening in Canada, and we just have to look at that and look and face the reality of what's happening for us economically. Now, there's that part of it. Next is that when we look at the number of people that are in fact leaving Canada, it's generally those individuals, higher income, they're looking into the future and they're going,
I don't want to be here to support what they see coming,
which is higher taxes, higher cost of living. So they're actually hedging their bet in advance. Now, there are certainly a lot of immigrants that are going back to their country, and whatever that country might be, they're going,
this doesn't make any sense. We came to Canada with this intention.
But there's also the reality of some other scenarios, JG, which is what we talked about briefly leading into the show, which is it doesn't really matter where you go in the world. There is economic challenges, economic strife, if we could use that term. And so as much as you may have immigrated from India, you may have immigrated into Canada from Germany, whatever other country that there might be, well, going back there, you're not really winning.
Wow, winning.
You're not going to gain more other than you're maybe going back to cultural familiarity, language, those kinds of things, perhaps some family. So there is that part of it. But what we are definitely seeing is those individuals, boomer-ish, higher income-ish, and they're finding, I guess, homes in other countries where lower cost of living, and they can stay away from the tax man in a better way than in Canada. So is it a flood? Relatively speaking, is it going to shut down our economy because of it? No. So that's that part of it.
I think what's fascinating about this, Patrick, is that when you look at this chart, and this one, I love charts that go back further than just a couple of years, and I love how this chart really goes back to 2010, and you could see how much different. There's two things that I see on this chart that scares me, and I know you got other things you want to talk about, but the two things is that the makeup of this chart has changed a lot over time. Look at that gray bar. It went from essentially being 40% of this chart, 40% of the bars, if you will, down to nothing, and that's a natural increase. So essentially, Canada's gone down to just about zero in terms of natural increase. Now, I'm to blame for that. That's people like me not having kids, so I'll take full responsibility for that. But the natural increase has just gone down to absolutely nothing. And then the second thing is that non-permanent residents as a category has gone up so much aggressively. And I think if this is typically, and I think this is why the government has opened the borders as much as they have, is because of the lack of natural increase. But these are things that have a fundamental impact on not just our culture, not just society, but this is a big, big part of the real estate market because this drives rents, this drives renters, this drives purchasers and buyers of real estate. interesting to see where this all goes, Patrick.
Well, I think there's a few things that we have to consider here, JG. You know, as investors, we have to look at the overarching kind of condition of the economy and what's going on. And we look at immigration, we look at population growth as a key driver of the real estate market, to your point, but it's also a key driver of our economy. Now, when we look at what's happening in terms of population growth, this again is a global kind of phenomena where people are having less children, and that's driven primarily because they can't afford it. There is a cost to having children, as we know. There certainly are some societal challenges and implications that people don't want to bring children into. There's lots of stories around that. But consider this, is that, the country escapes my mind right at the moment because it's just fresh. I just caught it, which is whatever country it is saying that if you commit to having 4 children, JG, 4 children, all taxes are off the table. In other words, commit to having 4 children, deliver on that commitment, and you will not pay taxes ever again in your lifetime. And that's just speaks to the challenges of population growth, even at a global level. So I wish I could remember the country. I just don't.
If that was the commitment that our government would make, you and I would be having four children right now. I mean, I'd be lining them up for free taxes, for no taxes. Let's line them up, baby.
I get it. And the thing is that, you know, it will probably not be a bad strategy when you think about it. So anyways, enough, you know, off that topic. So then when we look at immigration, and the reality of it is that we've talked about it so many times. It's been a button for me. I don't quit kind of shining a light on the low productivity of this country, the fact that our economy has been so based on real estate. We don't manufacture, we don't export enough goods in my world, and the numbers, you know, bear that as the reality of what we face. But ultimately, immigration is what really supports this economy, and that is people moving into the country, spending money to get set up. What's starting to happen, of course, is our infrastructure is crumbling. We're not actually able to rebuild fast enough. We're not putting money where it needs to be and allocated to where it needs to be. And so we're seeing a breakdown on the infrastructure side of it. Now, on the real estate side of it, you know, as investors, if we can be tenacious, if we can be strategic, if we can see our way through these challenging times when it comes to getting mortgages and higher interest rates, if we can be creative in terms of what we have to be as rental housing providers, we know that demand for the product that we're providing is there and it's sustainable. And I mean, in any business model, and we of course talk about treating your real estate investing like a business, in any business model, if you have that kind of long-term lineup, if you will, of people that want to buy your product or need to buy your product, it is becoming a huge demand, then we're ahead of the game. So immigration and the, you know, in this case, as much as they talk about non-permanent residents, many of those non-permanent residents will be turned into permanent residents as the days go on. And I don't think they're going to cut back. They keep saber rattling, or they keep placating the masses, saying, no, we're going to cut back because it's a huge issue for people. They're complaining a lot about it. So politically, what they're saying is,
no, we're going to cut back.
I don't think that's going to happen. They'll make it sound or look like it is, but it isn't going to change the numbers. And I got to say, JG, if they were to shut down immigration, and Poilievre, for example, when he becomes prime minister, he's going to say, we're shutting it down. Like, he's talking 200,000 or 300,000 people. Well, that's fine, but you better be able to pick up the slack on the other side.
Yeah, for sure.
From an economic conditions point of view. And that means more productivity, more manufacturing, and certainly more exports of goods so that we're driving revenue into this market.
Now, by the way, the country you're talking about with the commit to 4 kids, don't pay any taxes, it's Hungary, the producers tell me.
That's right. Hungary.
Yeah, hungry.
Hungry.
So I mean,
Yeah.
I'm getting hungry right now to have children. If that's going to be the commitment of no taxes, you know, for 4 kids, I think that's a good deal, Patrick.
Thanks for checking that out. That's great. Hey folks, always a reminder, you're watching this video, make sure you like, make sure you subscribe, hit that notification button so that you get other videos just like this one. And certainly give us some comments, give us some feedback, let us know what you like, what you don't like, what you agree with, what you don't disagree with. Remember to subscribe.
All right, folks, in this episode number 42, we got a lot to talk about. We got charts, as always. Patrick's in Hawaii, so it's going to be quite conversational. It's going to be a little bit more of a laissez-faire show. I'm pretty excited about it. We're going to be talking about immigration. We're going to be talking about population. We're going to be talking about the next hot real estate commodity, Patrick. Let's call it real estate Bitcoin. I don't know. That's maybe not the right way to put it, but we'll talk about that asset class that is going to be really, really hot in the future. And then also we're going to talk about debt levels and what that means to countries, what that means to people, and how that could come to bite people in the butt. So lots of cover, Patrick, on this show. And as we talked about in the opening segment, I mean, immigration and population is a big, big factor. As part of our real estate market, it's a big factor. It's becoming a big issue in the politics as well. As we go into, when's the election? Oh, the U.S. election is this fall. Next fall is going to be our election here in Canada. Is that correct, Patrick?
November 2025-ish.
Gosh, it can't come soon enough, can it?
Oh, gosh, no kidding.
But let's talk population growth, Patrick. We showed some interesting charts here at the beginning about the population growth. Now, what's interesting is Canada has had a record number of immigration in the last couple of years. But really, Alberta is even outpacing that, Patrick, because people are coming into Canada and then immediately moving to Alberta, a lot of them. And you can see that the population growth in Alberta is 4.5% year over year is where it's at. And this is pretty significant, Patrick, because this is huge. If you look just a couple of years ago, I mean, it was hovering around 1% forever for a really long time. And I think Alberta got used to that, and then now 4.5%, and you're seeing that in the Alberta real estate market. A lot of growth over there happening, and a big driving part of that is all the incoming people, which we talk about. Population is one of the economic fundamentals that drives real estate market.
Yeah, at the end of the day, we are challenged as a country. Alberta is going to and has got increasingly growing challenges when it comes to population growth. So let's look at population growth into Alberta, into Canada. As we said earlier on, it's what really is a big part of what's driving our economy now. Even as real estate starts to slow down, what's driving us economically is in fact the immigration. Now, when you look at what's going on in Alberta and you see the off the charts growth, the record growth, it is ultimately a race to affordability. The challenges that now Alberta is facing, like the rest of the country, and we're seeing, for example, what was happening in Toronto, Vancouver, our major cities, is the fact that we don't have the infrastructure to support it. And I mean the infrastructure of the places to live is one side of the equation. We keep seeing the housing and real estate market feeling the pressure of people coming in. Where are people working and where can they work is another issue, and it's a big issue that's starting to impact. But then we look at healthcare, we even look at transportation, and do we have the support that we need for a growing population at that speed and at that volume of people coming in, JG?
That's something, Patrick, that's interesting. I've noticed this big shift essentially since post-COVID. And I don't know if it's driven by the immigration, but one thing I definitely see, and I'd love to see some stats on this, maybe the producers can pull something up for another episode, but I've seen a ton of people take public transportation that didn't usually take public transportation. And I don't know if it's because of a lack of affordability, and it's obviously more expensive than ever to drive a car, buy a car, insure a car, put fuel in the car, so on and so forth. But like, I'm seeing lineups at the bus stop. And that is just not something I saw 5 years ago. You didn't see people, like, you may see one person at a bus stop. Now you see like 5, 6, 7 people at a bus stop routinely in Peterborough, and that's a change. And I think I'm curious, why do you think that is, Patrick?
I think it's a number of things. I think certainly you've got a certain demographic that doesn't even want to own a car, and that is the cost of the car. To your point, insurance, parking. Gas, like putting fuel in it, all of those things, number one. Number two, new Canadians don't want to drive in this particular country. They're not equipped to do it. They may not have the skills that you need to be able to drive in the country. And then let's face it, I mean, a lot of cases, public transport is the most efficient way to travel. When you're into a heavy populated area, which is in the major cities that you're seeing, Peterborough, not as much, but even in Peterborough, I think that's more of an affordability issue. But you look at Toronto, and to get around, the most efficient and effective way to do that is public transport. We're seeing that, and fortunately in Calgary, and we talked about Alberta, look at what's happening in Calgary and Edmonton, the infrastructure of rapid transit, that's what they want us to do anyways, but ultimately that's what's happening. And I think that's going to continue. You're going to see more and more of that because it's just efficient, effective. It is a cost-effective way to get around.
But check this out, Patrick. I want to share. I'm gonna put up a photo here of something pretty wild. And this, you want to talk about the future of transportation? I mean, it's interesting because I think there's no doubt there's this kind of this flow towards public transportation. But check this picture out, Patrick. I was in the grocery store. I come out, I get into my big dually, 3,500 gas guzzling, fuel consuming, thing costs like $1,000 a month on fuel. And as I go, and this guy is ripping through the parking lot at the grocery store, and I say to him, "Hey, buddy," I said, "Come over here. Let me talk to you about this thing." And I'll show you here. I want to put it up on the screen. Check this out. So this, by the way, this is an electric vehicle, Patrick. An electric vehicle. Talked about electric vehicles. It might get. Are we going to get a little heated on this show about electric vehicles? Maybe we will. But check this out. This thing here costs $600, Patrick. This thing here goes 60 kilometers an hour, and it lasts. I forget how many hundreds of kilometers on the charge. It was like this was incredible. This was totally this guy's mode of transportation. And in the wintertime, I'm not shitting you, this is an all-wheel drive, and in the wintertime, he put off-road tires. Like, he put winter tires on it, and he would keep using this in the wintertime. And there's, of course, this isn't going to work in Edmonton. It's not going to work in Timmins, Ontario. But there's no reason this won't work in Vancouver. There's no reason it won't work in Toronto. There's no reason. Well, Montreal's a different story because they get a lot of snow over there. But the point is that this is going to chew up a big part of the market as well, Patrick, as it comes to vehicles and vehicle sales. A lot of the younger people, up to a certain point, but the kids at 15, 16 years old, they're not going to want a car like you and I did. They're going to want one of these things, and they're going to drive this thing until their mid-20s, until they have a family, until they have a wife or a husband or whatever. I mean, what do you think about this? I'm just fascinated by this because I think this here is going to, take a lot of vehicle sales and postpone people's vehicle sales into the future.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's all changing. I mean, we have to look into the future. When we look 10 years down the road, we're going to see a lot more technology, and this is really technology. So at the end of the day, we start to see that from a cost effective way of transportation, this is where younger people are definitely going to go. And I don't think it's even 15, 16. I'm saying really up into the late 20s is where people are going to continue to use this mode of transportation. Ultimately, people are getting married a little bit later. They're living in different circumstances. So ultimately, I mean, think about this. You don't have to park it. You take it down or up into your condo or down into your suite, whatever it might be. It's an effective way to get around. So, I agree. I think this is definitely a growing trend.
Now, Patrick, I'm just poking the bear here because I love to do that. But how do you think this is going to fit into the 15-minute cities?
I think that's a great question. And I ultimately think that this is exactly what 15-minute cities are going to be about. I don't know yet how much of what the charges will be. This isn't public transportation. It's not walking. So is there going to be a special kind of, allowance for scooters? I have no idea. I'm suspecting that they'll use this as, okay, you're not using a gas-powered vehicle to leave your district. So there you go.
I think it's interesting that, and listen, they still have a lot of stuff to figure out because I'm telling you, like these things here in Peterborough, we have these really cool paved nature trails where people walk and so on and so forth. But you get a couple, and I say kids, but it doesn't matter. It could be adults too. You get a couple people with some of these zipping down that at 50, 60 kilometers an hour. It's a hazard, man. These things are fast. And there's no doubt they're going to have to figure that part out. And I think that's why they're doing a lot of bike lanes, Patrick, in places like Edmonton, which I know is another hot button for you. I'm purposely trying to poke your hot buttons just to get a little bit of reaction from you.
Not going to happen.
But I think that's why cities are investing so much money in bike lanes. It's not because they expect people are going to be biking all the time, but I think we're going to see more and more of this type of transportation.
Well, you speak of Edmonton. I mean, Edmonton had the whole scooter program across the city where you just grab a scooter, swipe your card, ride it. It bills you, drop it off wherever you want to abandon it. And there was like hundreds of scooters all over the city. And so, Edmonton's already adopted this. So this is not new in that regard. It's like the rental bikes that they have I think Vancouver still has them. And certainly in Europe, it's a big thing where you just grab a bike, swipe your card,
The
whatever.
Bixie bikes. I think they're
Yeah.
called Bixie bikes or something.
Yeah.
Well,
Lots of
one of
names
the
for 'em.
producers, one of the producers was in Oslo recently, and they're talking about how these are very, very big. I think Europe adopts this stuff way faster than North America does. There's no doubt about that. But here's my question for you. Let's bring it down to the real estate level, Patrick. Is how do you see? Let's just say it becomes a mass adoption of this stuff. And this is what you and I have we've held conferences on this in the past, you and I. But let me poke you right here, right now, while you're in Hawaii, sipping on margaritas. By the way, are you having margaritas right now? Like, I know it's only 8 in the morning there, but
dude, I quit drinking.
oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, you're better that way, by the way. But
My body is a temple. My body's a temple. I'm it's just.
Here's my question: as we go more and more into this vein of transportation, and as we go more and more down this path, and if you extrapolate this forward, how do you see this impacting real estate though? Because a lot of real estate, listen, our cities have been built around cars driving and the number of cars on the road and all that stuff. And as we go more and more towards mass adoption of this kind of transportation, it's going to have a major effect on cities, and it's going to have a major effect on real estate. Now, I don't think it's going to happen overnight where people won't see it coming. I think if you have your eyes open, you'll see it coming. But forecast for me where you see this going in the future, Patrick, because this is very, very interesting to me from a real estate perspective.
I think you make a really good point. I haven't really thought that one through, so I don't know that I have the answer. But if I was just to kind of take it for face value in terms of the question, I mean, to your point, a lot of real estate changed when you had access. So in other words, for years it was about access. And if all of a sudden, this particular neighborhood that wasn't accessible before, and all of a sudden there's a street and there's a highway to it, and then all of a sudden you had boom, this whole broke. It's like Peterborough, real estate prices. What happened with real estate prices in Peterborough was they exploded after they opened up 407, and all of a sudden, an hour and a half or 2 hour drive turned into a 45-minute or an hour drive, depending on where you're coming from. So there's that aspect of it. I think the nature of what's happening in terms of population growth, we still have to understand the fundamental. People need a place to live. I think that we've already seen and will continue to see, and although many people are going, well, people are going to go back to the office, going to have to start driving, and everybody's going to be working from the office. No, we're, certainly the amount of people that are working from home that don't need the vehicle, that is not going to go away. I don't know if it'll continue to grow, but I don't think it's going to shrink. I think you're going to continue to see that work from home cohort that don't need a vehicle, that will, having a scooter is going to be very, very effective, and it will work. So I think, I don't know what the dynamic of it would be. I don't think it's going to have a direct impact on real estate. However, back to, 15-minute cities and districts and all those kinds of things, that is the one that I don't know what's going to happen. We gotta wait and see how that unfolds in the cities that are doing the 15-minute city concept. But ultimately, I have to go back to the foundation of demand is demand for real estate when it comes to having a place to live. Immigration is the bigger driver of it. Transportation changes will still have an impact on neighborhoods because people will still be driving car. Whether they're autonomous, JG, we talk about, autonomous, doesn't matter. They still need roads, they still need access. So I don't see it as a big impact.
Yeah, but I think you hit the nail on the head there with the word access, which is, and you got to think, I mean, as a real estate investor myself, I can tell you that when I'm buying real estate now, I'm asking myself, I'm trying to get into the habit of already asking myself the questions, are there bike lanes around here? Does the city have a plan to put bike lanes on this road? Are there any backcountry trails, or, in Peterborough, like I said, we got these railway trails that are paved that are really good for these kinds of scooters. Are there any of those nearby? The same way I used to check, where's the closest Tim Hortons? Where's the closest grocery store? Where's the closest Starbucks? Where's the closest schools? I still do all of that, but I'm asking a few new questions, which is, are there bike lanes? Will there be bike lanes? Are there any proposed plans? And that kind of changes how you look at things. And then I'm also looking at my apartments as I do renovations. I look at apartments a little differently. I'm asking myself the question, if one of my tenants has one of these, well, where are they going to charge it? Is there an easy, convenient spot for them to plug it in at the front door? Is there a closet? Is there an easy space for them to just store it at the front, or do they have to bring this up to their bedroom? These are just different questions that I think real estate investors should get in the habit of. Listen, this trend is not here yet, but if you wait until the trend is here, you will have missed the opportunity. And I think that's what's important about real estate investors is you want to get ahead of these waves. And right now, there's a lot of things happening in the world that are creating these waves. Some not so good, some really good. But as an investor, it's your job to be ahead of these waves.
JJ, you make some really good points in what you've said there. And I want to shine a light on something. The way we buy real estate, whether it's a first-time home buyer or a next-time home buyer or us as an investor, there's a lot of people, and we see it in the headlines, we see a lot of expectations and comparisons to what once was, and what boomers did, and X amount of times income versus prices, 3 times income to buy a house. Now it's 12 times or 10 times or whatever the number is. It doesn't matter. The point is that we live in an old story. To your point, as investors, as the real estate world has changed forever. Okay, I'm going to say it again. Real estate has changed forever. We're not going back ever to what once was. We have to look into the future and anticipate the shifts that are happening. And we're living through it. And to your point, if we don't take into consideration, okay, I have this property, I'm a rental housing provider. What is the client demographic that I want to attract? What are they going to be driving? What do they need for services? What are they going to want for location in terms of access to trails and stores and all of the rest of it? And how are they going to get to those stores? Are they walking? Are they biking? Are they on a scooter? So these are all things, so aside from banking and getting mortgages, down payments, and the cost of all of those things, understood. But we as investors have to look into the future knowing that we can't hang on to a story that'll be going back to what it once was. And I just want to really emphasize that as investors, and as within RAIN and what you and I do and what we look at in terms of economic fundamentals, what we look at in terms of the how-tos of investing in real estate, the game is changing. And we have to continue to look into the future and anticipate the shifts that are happening. And I think you shone a great light on a big part of that when we're analyzing a property.
Yeah, it's a good point, Patrick. And there's certainly a lot of people, you and I hear of them and hear them very often. There's probably people watching this show that spend all their time and their effort and their energy, talking about a story that once was, and they're stuck in that old story and they can't seem to break through, and they just can't see the future for what it is. And I think that's a dangerous place for investors to be. Because then you spend all your time looking in the rearview mirror, and you just can't drive a car or any vehicle looking in the rearview mirror. You have to look forward. You have to make decisions for the future because this thing's moving forward, and there's a lot of opportunity. And you have to, maybe a challenge for some, but you have to force yourself to look for those opportunities. Go find them. That's your job as an investor, is to look for these opportunities. Go find them and go take advantage of these opportunities, because there's a lot of them out there, Patrick. There's also a lot of tough stuff, but there's a lot of opportunities out there.
There is a lot, and within the chaos there always is. The challenge that many face, and we're seeing it, many are sitting on the sidelines for all the reasons that they are. That's less access to capital. When you had a line of credit that you could tap into at 2% or even 3% to use as a down payment, those things are off the table because that line of credit's now costing you 7, 8, 10%, whatever that might be. So access to capital to use as investment is much more difficult. And then, of course, mortgage financing. There's a lot of headwinds, but for those who are patient, who take the time it takes, who are willing to do the grind, and this will speak to the dwellings under construction that we want to talk about. And when we start to consider that breakdown, so we've got immigration growth, We've got, which is population growth. We got people moving in. We know that demand is high for rental properties. Our job is to say, okay, how do we actually be that rental housing provider? And then what is the asset class that we tap into in terms of property type, JG? And this is where I think that when we look at these numbers and we look at that detached, what they refer to as single family, but that detached property is really going to be the new real estate gold or real estate Bitcoin. It's that rare asset that I think we have to try and get our hands on, and that's where I want to put some time and energy. And I know you, as a developer, are looking at those detached units and going, okay, I'm going to, suite it. I'm going to do, an ADU. I'm going to do something, and which is, of course, a lot of what we talked about.
Now, Patrick, so let's define a single family, Patrick, because, in the realm of real estate investors, single family means essentially a property that is, in this case, detached, and it has up to 3 units in it, right? It could be a single family, it could be a duplex, or single family plus ADU, plus maybe a coach home, whatever the case may be. But the point is, it's a separate piece of land, it's detached, unlike a condo where it's one piece of land in a tower, or multiple dwellings, meaning 5 dwellings or 50 dwellings or 500 dwellings, depending on the size of the condo building. That's what you're talking about, right, Patrick? Which is the single family. And as we can see by this graph in this chart, I mean, this is on the down. This is going down, and I don't see this necessarily changing, because the municipalities and the powers that be, whoever they are, they're really pushing for density and maximum density in the urban centers. And that means they got to build up. And that means that single families are going to become more and more and more valuable. And you don't have to look very far, Patrick, to see this. This is like history repeating itself. You look at, and if you're in Canada and you want to see where the real estate market is going, look at Europe. Like, go back and look at London, England. Try to find a single family detached dwelling in London, England. Just go try. See if you find one. The odds are you're not going to be able to find one, because they don't exist, because they're a much older country than we are, Patrick. As a result of that, they've gone through this phase already. That's the way I look at this. And if you do find a detached single family dwelling in some of these major populated areas that have a much older country than we are, you'll see their value is through the roof. And the reason for that is because there's just not a whole lot of them. And I think we're going to go through this phase, especially, and some of our cities have already gone through this phase. Vancouver, look at the price of real estate. Toronto, look at the price of real estate. I mean, they are just a little further ahead, but I think a lot of other cities are going to be going through this as well as we go forward.
Well, when we look at the number of so when we look at this particular chart, we start to see just how few, relatively speaking, in terms of under construction. There's another part to that. When we look at the hopper, when we look at the top of the funnel, we start to see that by the numbers, permits are way down. So in other words, there isn't any kind of work in progress that is coming on board. So this number is not going to change anytime soon. And so as investors, we say, okay, well, what asset class do we want to be in from a real estate market point of view? And if we can get our hands on single family, if we can make the math work, and we can, by the way, the math does work if you get into that ADU, you get into a triplex, duplex. You have to, this is where the grind comes in, JG. That's where the opportunities are, but you have to go looking for them. It's not like you're walking down the street finding these deals, and you're rarely finding them on MLS. The point is that the numbers can work, but you have to look at it from a 2, 3, even a 4-plex kind of perspective. And there's where the opportunities live. And there's not a lot out there, but that's the rarity of it. That's when you look at an asset class. That's why it's
gold. It's gold.
That's why it's real estate gold.
There's not a lot out there. That's why it's gold. And you can see here and this is back to the permits and kind of the intention. If you look at this chart here under the dwellings under construction, really gives you a sense of the big divergence between the rentals, the condos, and the single family. And then you look at this one here, Patrick, and you can see multifamily in terms of dollars, building permits and dollar value, multifamily trending up, going nothing but up, single family going nothing but down, and they're really going in opposite directions now. And I think that this is a good prelude of what's coming into the future, and it's also a good prelude, as you mentioned, to the value of those properties into the future, specifically single family or those smaller detached properties. They're going to become more and more and more valuable.
Well, there's a couple things. The only province right now in Canada that has any kind of construction going on in that space is in Alberta, Calgary being specific to where the majority of that growth is. So there is construction happening in Alberta in that single family phase, but space. But they're also, consider that, as much as we hear all the optimism around Ontario, and I get it, you're in the space, you can probably speak to it really well. They take and change all the zoning, and you can put, as many units as you can put in, up to an eightplex, blah, blah, blah. But then on the other side of it, what is the cost of doing it? Why isn't construction exploding? Oh, well, in Vancouver, for example, the development charges alone increased 50 grand. So as much as they brought some costs down, the development charges increased 50 grand. So this goes back to JG. It's like, oh, the government on one side, they give it, and then on the other side, they take it away. This is a problem that we're going to continue to have. It is absolutely not going anywhere anytime soon. And so that's why this asset class remains, by the way. I just wanted to add that part to it because I know a lot of people are saying,
Yeah, but look what they did. They rezoned and you can build all of this.
well, you can, but you can't afford to. The math doesn't work and developers aren't going to take it on. And of course, and you've learned the bureaucracy of which you have to get through to get something built is off the charts as well.
Yeah, don't even get me started. Let's not open up that can of worms. It just does nothing but frustrate me, Patrick. Well, what's interesting is some of these challenges that we're all going through is literally changing the makeup of our real estate sector. And this is an interesting chart that shows you how much first-time home buyers are down since 2015. We're talking well over 20% first-time home buyers are down. This is and that's why, and Patrick, you and I have been saying for a long time, we're becoming a nation of renters. And this is why first-time homebuyers can't get into the market. And I think this is what a lot of people are trying to solve for, is to get first-time homebuyers into the market. And they're going about it, of course, the entirely wrong way. The government is only making it worse, not making it better. Let's be very clear. This is what they're trying to solve for. They're trying to get those first-time homebuyers back into the market. And you can see repeat homebuyers definitely trending up. Investors also trending up, Patrick, especially since COVID. I find that fascinating. Look at the beginning of COVID, boom, a complete reversal in trend where it was trending down in terms of the year over year, and now it's gone completely the other way. And now we have more in terms of percentage change since COVID. Investors are the leading category, which is quite interesting, Patrick.
Well, I think that these numbers are lagging, so I think you're going to see that shift as well. So when we look at when we start to get these numbers at the end of 2024, you're going to see that dip down quite dramatically, I believe. But we'll start to see. This is really a stark visual, if you will, of what's happening with home buyers, and this is a trend that is not going to go away. Which goes back to what I was talking about, and we talked about many, many times. This market is challenging for investors, and that's not going to go away, but it's equally or more challenging for those individuals who want to buy a home. And so the home buyers, and that's why we have the self-funding house initiative that we're partnering on, is to support home buyers in actually being able to buy their first time home. But having said all of that, from an investor point of view, it's not for the faint of heart right now what we're going through. This is a part of the cycle that is really painful in many, many regions, given what's going on with banking and interest rates, and mortgage qualifications, finding cash flow, and all the rest of it. But when you look at the upside to being a real estate investor, for those who are willing to go through the grind, who are willing to do the work, make themselves, create that team, take the time it takes to get through all of the chaos and the uncertainty, the upside is very strong in creating a long-term wealth strategy, JG. It's just as plain as the chart in front of us.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, as we go beyond this, Patrick, and we talk about, two of the driving factors of real estate, and you, Mr. Alberta, Should I call you Mr. Hawaii today because you're in Hawaii? Maybe not.
Today, yeah, for sure.
But as you know, we've talked a lot about Alberta in the last 3-4 years, Patrick. There's no doubt, and there's two driving factors that continue. And for those that are watching this show, and if they're not familiar, people are interesting when they think about Alberta because they correlate real estate prices, and Alberta's had a nice run up in real estate prices, which has happened in the past before. It's not the first time it has happened in Alberta, but people think that the real estate run up comes first. But there's two driving factors before the real estate run up, and this is one of them, Patrick, which is the population growth, which we've already talked about. As you can see, Alberta's outpacing the rest of the country in terms of population growth. That leads to accelerated real estate prices. And the second thing, Patrick, is more economic activity. And here is a really cool chart you've put together, or not you've put together, but you found from ATB on the manufacturing sales and the manufacturing sector in Alberta. You could see really since that 2020, man, since COVID, they have just been rocking and rolling, and they're up, in terms of manufacturing sales, like from roughly 6.5 billion up to 9.5 billion. I mean, that's good growth.
Huge numbers, but it speaks to what we often talk about, which people, and I know not you so much, you understand, but ultimately, people may be critical of my criticism of government, but ultimately, to me, this is a very kind of perfect example of what Canada lacks as a country. Alberta is doing. That is in the realm of productivity, of driving GDP. And, on top of immigration coming into that province, they're actually delivering. Manufacturing has, I've said it every show, we need more productivity. Manufacturing is one of those, really key drivers of productivity. And Alberta is really taking that on, whereas we're not seeing that in the rest of the country. So the point of it is this, is that when we look at what's happening economically in Alberta, it continues to be a leader in that space. It's why, as investors, we can be pretty bullish about what's going to happen in the real estate market. That isn't without the cautionary note, JG, which is buy for cash flow. Don't do what many are doing, which is now into a boom market. What are they doing? It's speculating. I mean, gosh, how many times do people have to see a boom market, be geniuses, and then get their butt handed to them because they didn't pay attention? So my point is this, from the REIN community point of view, this is a boom market that's happening in Calgary specifically. We're going to see Edmonton follow likely. And as we go into a boom market, we all look like geniuses. We all are making money on paper, but we have to be very, very cautious through this cycle. And so that, because ultimately we will come down and we'll enter into a slump cycle at some point. And we don't know what the timing of that is going to be, but we have to consider that. So make sure that you're buying right. And yes, Alberta is bullish, and this is one of the reasons why, is because productivity is high.
Should I open up the door, Patrick, that you talked about, and you've shown in many charts before how Edmonton typically always follows Calgary, but you're not sure this time. You're not sure if Edmonton is going to follow Calgary quite like it has in the past. Why is that?
Well, we talk about the long-term real estate success formula, JG, and within that, there is the economic fundamentals that drive. So, for example, immigration, GDP, job growth, all of those things are the kind of the foundation, the fundamentals. But along come these things called influencers. Influencers are things like real estate or interest rates. But the other influencer is politics. And sadly, when we look at what's happening politically in Alberta, there's a bit of an upheaval. When we consider the political policies and belief systems of an NDP government, Edmonton is NDP. Now, when we look into the future of Alberta, guess what? NDP is going to give the Conservatives a run for their money. Now, as much as that's political, so forget about, let's just take politics out of it. The reality of it is that there are very, very clear policies and ways of operating that the NDP has versus the Conservatives. If you believe in that program, if you believe in those politics, then keep investing in real estate the way you do it. But my suggestion is that you pay attention to these influencers that are coming up, because that's where a NDP government will come in and they'll implement, for example, rent controls. Is that a risk? You bet it's a risk. So we have these influencers in our real estate market and in that real estate success formula that we present all of the time, and we have to have a consideration for that. So these are new things that are starting to emerge in Alberta that we have to pay attention to. Edmonton's already all in. I mean, they're NDP and have been for a couple of years now. And so when I look at the future of Edmonton, it makes me a little bit cautious. That's it. I'm cautious, and I think that is healthy.
Now, you talk about influencers, Patrick, and I find that's interesting because if we dug into influencers, a lot of people look at that and they say, well, if it's not an economic fundamental, it's only an influencer. I can still kind of progress. I can put the blinders on. I can still progress. My word of caution, and this has nothing to do with Alberta, but in general, you have to realize that influencers are influencers until they impact their fundamentals, and now they're no longer influencers. Now they're part of the fundamentals.
100%. 100%. And so, we just have to always be aware. Like I say, look at Alberta right now. It's a boom market. We're in a boom cycle. Everything is roses. Everything's awesome. And yeah, there's complaining and bitching and moaning about infrastructure, all the rest of it. But from a real estate point of view, it's a boom cycle. The thing about it is, in a boom cycle, people forget to do their homework. They forget to do their diligence. They forget to risk mitigate because there's these big allowances for errors. But when you get into a tight market, and we see this in Toronto, for example, JG, is that all of a sudden, kind of shit hits the fan and people are in trouble. You look at an absolute meltdown of the condo market in Toronto. We haven't even talked about that. It is an absolute meltdown, and it's only just starting. So that is because so much speculation, not investing. It was speculation. We've said it 100 times. It was more like gambling, and that is coming back to haunt many investors and that whole condo market.
It's all coming home to roost, Patrick. It's all coming home to roost. That's for sure. Now, these last two slides, Patrick, I'll let you speak to them. But one of the things, there's two things interesting happening here. One of them is that immigration, which is people leaving Canada, especially for the U.S., has just hit a 10-year high. And I'm curious to see if there's a correlation between that, Patrick, and this particular chart, which talks about, the adjusted debt levels in Canada. Do you think these things are connected? And maybe you could speak to these things. I mean, you follow this stuff really, really closely, and you do get pretty fired up and passionate about it. So you think these things are connected?
I don't see the connection of, Bank of Canada policy and, people heading south. I think this is a cost of living. This is a tax, depending on what state you're moving into. This is also a lot about boomers getting tired of winter and wanting to take their money south of the border where they can be warm. And I think that's kind of the natural progression of what we're seeing happen in this particular market. So when you look at people moving into the U.S., depending on what state you're moving into, there's all sorts of preferential tax treatment, if you will. There's far better in the U.S. in some states. I think it's weather related, and even if you look at housing, I mean, ultimately, the cost of housing in the U.S. is significantly less than Canada. There's some resistance going on. As I sit here in Hawaii today, I look at it and go, oh yeah, okay, well that bill is not so bad. That $100 or $200 lunch wasn't so bad, of course, and then you add, 40% exchange rate to it, and you go, this sucks. Anyways, my point is I think that's a lot of what is happening is also lifestyle changes.
Now, so then if that's the immigration story, talk to us about this Bank of Canada policy rate and the adjusted debt levels.
Well, so when you look at it, this is classic. This is part of what is going to really continue to slow our economy down. I'm looking at the ultimate, we live in this world, JG, where, we talked about earlier in the show, where we're eliminating so much of the middle class. And so when you start to see the creep, it starts from the bottom up. So in other words, the first to be affected by rising costs are those lower paying jobs, like within the service industry, as an example. And so what's happening with them? They're couch surfing, they're living in one bedrooms and having roommates move in to be able to afford a place to live. I mean, we're seeing the number of people living on the street explode right across the country, by the way. And so what's happening with all of this is the cost of living increases. And part of that cost of living is a lot of debt was taken on in that middle class. So that's all catching up. Disposable income, discretionary income, all of those things get hammered because of the debt loads. We're seeing credit card debt rise because people are actually paying their bills through credit card. And then we have the servicing of mortgage debt. And I saw today, I didn't have the chart for it, but I want to say that the increase in the past 2 years of the mortgage proportionate share of payments in a family is up 64%. Now, 64%. So in other words, you start to see how much discretionary or disposable income is now going to pay debt. What does that translate to? It means we have less money to spend on goods and services. We were for years a consumer-driven economy. Now, whether that be in real estate or boats, cars, or vacations or whatever, because we could borrow money at 2% or 3%. Those days are now gone for the foreseeable future. At this point, we don't know how long it's going to take for rates to come down, or will they ever come back to that point? No. The point is this, is that the debt levels are high. It is going to continue to slow the economy down. So as much as, take immigration off the table, JG, and we would be in a severe recession. Let's just face the reality of what that is. With real estate the way it is, and productivity as low as it is, and the access to consumer-driven buying, if you will, which is what we've done in the past, our economy would be shut down.
It's interesting, Patrick, just how they measure. If you look at, one of the ways they determine whether we're the way they determine if we're in a recession or not is by measuring GDP, which is essentially, total income or total consumption that they're supposed to equal minus savings. But if you look at that, Patrick, and if you take inflation out of it, take inflation out and you take out and make it on a per capita basis, we've already seen that we've been struggling for some time. In fact, it's only if you look at the aggregate number that it looks okay, and doesn't even look good. It just looks barely acceptable. But if you take out the inflation, which contributes, and if you take out the per capita component, it's not a rosy picture.
It is not a rosy picture, and so shine a light and state what it is, and it's bad news. But I cannot stress enough is that when we look at what we're trying to do, what are we trying to do? We're trying to create future wealth, and we're using real estate as a vehicle to do that. For those who are willing to do the work, do the grind, get the education, keep at it, there's huge upside, JG. There always is in these economic times. Hard to wrap your mind around, hard to have the, inspiration and the wherewithal to go through the grind, but the reality is what it is. And we can either deny it, roll up and kind of sit in the fetal position or lay in the fetal position in your parents' basement, or you can step up and keep grinding forward. And that's what it's going to be. And by the way, it's going to get worse before it gets better. And within this chaos is where the opportunity lives. And that's hopefully what we collectively as the Real Estate Investment Network, and you and I can be part of the leadership in supporting people to actually create that financial future using real estate as that vehicle.
I wouldn't have it any other way, Patrick. Chaos creates the opportunity. Without a ton of chaos, there wouldn't be a ton of opportunity. And since I live in the opportunity zone, life's good. Well, folks, hopefully you've enjoyed this episode number 42 of Rein It In. Patrick, thanks for doing this, even from Hawaii. It looks like a great time out there. I hope you get back to the beach, hit the surfboard. By the way, have you went surfing while you were there?
No, I haven't gone surfing. Where we are, there isn't the waves that we want. So this time, but I'll be back. I kind of looked at it and I was talking to Stephanie and I go, we got to get back to Hawaii.
Well, next time, take me with you.
We'll meet you here.
Thanks for watching, folks. Enjoy the show.
If you like what you learned here, go to the description below and subscribe for our free Insiders newsletter, where you can also stay up to date for our upcoming events and our courses.